Well, good morning and welcome to the RU-1st Forum. My name is Dr. James H. Whitney III. I am Assistant Vice Chancellor for Undergraduate Academic Affairs here at Rutgers New Brunswick, and I'm honored to be celebrating our second annual RU-1st Forum during our 5th annual Access Week here on the New Brunswick campus. I'm supposed to deliver a statement of purpose, but it'll be brief. A few things that I want to point out as we think about this week. Yesterday, we started our week by having over 250 high school students here with our Upward Bound Math Science program work to prepare for college from our Rutgers undergraduates. A new number of colleges from around the country came and joined them to help them think about college, and we had a host of administrators and others, so it was a great turnout. I want to thank Upward Bound and their staff for doing the work that they always do. I also want to note a few things as I was being reflective about a statement of purpose. Nearly 51 years ago, this year, Thurgood Marshall was appointed as the first African-American Supreme Court Justice. Nearly 50 years ago, this year in April, Dr. King was assassinated, dying for civil rights, justice, and equality. Also, as we get ready for 50 years, was the creation of the New Jersey Educational Opportunity Fund program. And you know, last year we celebrated 50 years of the Upward Bound program. All of these programs have been successful and have decided to continue to carry on the legacy of all the hard work of our students, our faculty, our staff, but all of the people like these folks that came before us that made it possible for access, equity, and equality, not only in education, but the opportunity for us to be here together, for, you know, resembling of racial and economic diversity. It's important that we think about that when we think about those students who are first in their families to go to college and what many people laid their life for and who have given up at the ultimate sacrifice their life and the fight to advocate and be supportive of the things that we do. It's also important to think about why someone decides to come to college. It's a very important time in their life, just like everything else, getting married, deciding to buy a first car. I think this is a huge one because it's something that prepares you for the future. Unfortunately, many students that are first in their family to go to college don't absolutely have necessarily all the tools or the knowledge or the wherewithal that prepares them for that. So they rely on us as educators. They rely on our high schools. They rely on our communities to help them prepare for this wonderful place that we call higher education. And so it is our obligation as administrators, faculty, and staff, and students to make sure that we do everything we can to make sure that students that are first in the family have an opportunity. The RU-1st initiative builds not only on the great work of programs like TRIO and EOF, but it works collaboratively. And we have administrators and faculty and staff from all across campus that have made sure that every student, especially those of the first generation, have the very best educational experience and the real opportunities here and once they leave. It's unique because this is not another program. It builds on what we already do. We don't need more resources to do this. We don't need to create more staff. What we need to do is use what we already have to create the success for all of the students. Certainly funds are great and we have to continue to advocate, but we are all intellectual beings that can make sure that students are treated fairly and equitably. Thurgood Marshall said in one of his quotes, he said, "Equal means getting the same thing at the same time at the same place." Rutgers is a great place, and it has been so for 251 years, and it can be for the next 50 years what we want it to be. And so I encourage all of you to sit back today, listen to the panelists that do this work every day, can talk to one another, and think about those students who've made Rutgers their home, and also have decided that this is the first time that they will embark on something like a higher education. I thank you, and I want you to enjoy the rest of the day. At this time, I'm going to introduce one of our students who will introduce our Chancellor, Zenaida Rosario. She is a first-generation student and a first-year student in the School of Arts and Sciences. She has hopes of graduating with a social work degree and continuing on at Rutgers to get her master's through the School of Social Work. She is currently a scholar in the newly created Paul Robeson Leadership Institute, an initiative of the RU-1st initiative in Undergraduate Academic Affairs. She is also an ambassador of that program, a member, an active member of the Leadership Living Learning community on campus, and a representative of all of the great work that you all do to make our students successful. Please join me in welcoming Zenaida.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Zenaida Rosario. I am a Student Support Services Scholar, and I'm also an ambassador for the Paul Robeson Leadership Institute. Thank you guys for having me. I'm a first-generation student, so it's initiatives like SAEE that give me hope, and I thank you all for being so interested in RU-1st. It's my first year at Rutgers University. Like me, it's also Chancellor Dutta's first year. So I'm really honored to be introducing him today. Chancellor Dutta, who joined the Rutgers community on July 1st, oversees Rutgers University-New Brunswick. He is responsible for both charting the university's future and leading the day-to-day operations of the Rutgers flagship. In a career spanning over 30 years, Chancellor Dutta has served as an educator, a scholar, and an administrator at 4 national research universities. At Rutgers, he is a tenured distinguished professor of engineering. Chancellor Dutta came to Rutgers most recently from Purdue University, West Lafayette, where he served as Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs and Diversity, and was Professor of Mechanical Engineering. Chancellor Dutta has served in various national committees on higher education. He is passionate about the transformative power of higher education on students' lives, their families, and the society at large. He has a long-standing commitment to enhancing student success, enriching the campus experience, promoting diversity and inclusion, and catalyzing innovation and research. Please join me in welcoming Chancellor Dutta.
Thank you, Zenaida, and good morning, everyone. It is really a pleasure for me to be a part of this event, even though for a very short while. As was mentioned, I came here from Purdue, where I was Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs and Diversity. And I focus on the diversity part because I think I was the very first research university provost who took on, in the title, changed by the Board of Trustees to make it Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs and Diversity. The reason I did that is because I fundamentally believe that diversity is an integral part of academic excellence. So here at this program, RU-1st, we are very pleased to bring together or coordinate, as James was saying, all our programs for access and equity. And I will say this, this effort is very important for an institution that is known to be and proud to be a land-grant institution. The land-grant concept 156 years ago was founded on the premise of providing higher education, access to higher education for a segment of the society that in those days were not a part. And look what happened to the country, how much we have progressed because of the access provided to a large segment of the society. So now the question in front of us is, in the 21st century, how do we reinvent, how do we embrace, how do we enhance the access part of this mission? And as I was saying to the gentleman here, I take a very, I look at access not by itself, but coupled with access and affordability. Without affordability, access is very difficult to sustain. So affordability, RU-1st is an example where, as James said, we don't recreate programs that already exist. We try to coordinate, we try to get students to understand what exists across campus, how best to leverage these programs for their benefit. And institutionally, this allows us to hold costs and maybe even reduce costs. So I am pointing the finger to myself. I want you to know I'm pointing the finger to myself that affordability is my responsibility. I should be held accountable by the state, by the taxpayers of the state. They should be able to ask, what is Rutgers-New Brunswick doing to hold costs of higher education down? We in higher education and leaders like myself, to be blunt, have not done a very good job. Cost of education has increased twice the rate of inflation, and student loan debt today exceeds $1 trillion. So you can increase scholarships and financial aid, but the issue is it's a leaky pipe. The more you give this way, the more is leaking out. So it's very important. I take that very seriously, and I commit myself and my office and Rutgers-New Brunswick not only to provide access and financial aid to students in need, but also at the same time hold costs down, reduce administrative costs, put those dollars towards academics. So once again, I welcome all of you, and especially our visitors, our panelists. I know you will add a lot to this conversation. I wish I could stay, but I don't have that luxury this morning. But I know that the audience will benefit from your insights. And I would like to hear from my leadership team, Ben and James, as to what ideas filtered out of this conversation that we can take to heart and try and implement. So welcome all students, faculty, staff, and visitors. I know you will find this program exciting, intellectually stimulating, and this is a cause that is important not only to public higher education, but to the nation and its capacity for innovation in the 21st century. We need talent from all segments of the society, and it is critically important that students who are qualified get the opportunity to attend higher education and contribute to the democracy and the societal good. So thank you very much. I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Chancellor. At this time, I would like to call up a person that I've grown to know, and he doesn't like when I say anything too much because he doesn't want me to brag, but I'll brag about him. I had the opportunity to work under the direction of our Vice Chancellor for Undergraduate Academic Affairs, who has been committed to improving access and equity and working on this initiative as a point of his administration among the first year that he became to work with the leadership to initiate this RU-1st initiative. And we've done some great things with a lot of the help and work of folks in here. So I think it's a great opportunity. We thank him for his leadership, and without further ado, bring up the Vice Chancellor, Ben Fuentes.
Good morning. And distinguished guests, welcome, and all of you, colleagues and friends, I am so happy to be here. It really is a pleasure to join you and to celebrate this 5th annual Access Week and the 2nd annual RU-1st Forum. Access Week hosts events such as this one to promote campus awareness for first-generation, low-income, and underrepresented students. November 2015, Undergraduate Academic Affairs and Student Access and Educational Equity formed RU-1st. I think James, Jacora, and I sat in James' tiny little office back then. I think you'll remember that. What do we call it? Do you remember, Jacora? And we formed this RU-1st Alliance to bring campus leaders, faculty, and staff to discuss issues first-generation students are facing. and discuss the best practices to support them to degree completion. I am extremely proud of the many unique initiatives that have been created since then. We work with partners across the campus to develop the RU-1st database to streamline courses, programs, and opportunities for first-generation students, low-income, and underrepresented students. We offer course offerings such as the RU-1st Burn seminars that connect faculty to first-generation students, and this program is now in its third year. This summer, we will welcome our third cohort of the Paul Robeson Leadership Institute, which targets first-generation students with focus on males who are low-income and historically underrepresented in higher education. Most of the previous participants of the Institute are making the Dean's List and have a 3.0 GPA or better. We are in the second year of the Chancellor's Study Abroad Scholarship for RU-1st students, which provides opportunities for first-generation students to participate in summer faculty-led study abroad opportunities. Last year we sent 15 students around the world and sent them, and this year we plan to send another dozen. And I remember one student in particular who was so excited because it was the first time he was going to get on a plane. He ended up in Greece. We joined the IamFirst.org platform, a national online community that provides first-generation college students and those who advise them with inspiration, information, and support on the path to and through college. UAA also expanded support for the Federal Student Support Services Grant to serve 600 students annually who identify as first-generation and low-income students who identify as first generation and low income, and we also hired additional advisors for the program. And looking to the future, we are working to establish a tag for first generation students to run better and more efficient reports for delivery and assessment, so we target our future initiatives on the needs of this student population. I know that this is a lot of information and there's more, but I just wanted to give you a brief overview because I'm extremely proud of this work. I'm extremely proud of our team and the work they do every day. And as Vice Chancellor, I vow to continue to support this student population and look forward to what is to come in the near future. Thank you all for being here, and I'm very much looking forward to our conversation today. Thank you.
I see some students, I see some McNair scholars and some other students, but if the students are here because you got up early this morning, where are you at? Can you stand up? There's a few of you out there. Can you stand up? Where are you students? Come on, students. Thank you for coming, all the students. I see the students. Some of these students came out to not be in, well, they should be in class, but they're here. This is important, right? I hope you're not. They're here, so if you know, deans, you see them, they're here. I want to just again thank all the folks. I want to give a brief acknowledgement to Sabrina Riddick, where is she at? And London Wilson in the Student Access and Educational Equity Office, and Jonna G. Lewis, who did a lot of the work behind the scenes, and all the staff in Student Access and Equity under Dr. Manning and Ms. Holman's leadership. I appreciate you all and all of the work that you do. So now I have the opportunity to bring up Thomas G. Mortensen, who is a senior scholar at the Pell Institute for the Study of Opportunity in Higher Education and an independent education policy analyst. His detailed bio is in the brochure, but I'd rather him present and let you all hear the great stuff that he has to say, or not, about the state of affairs here in the state of New Jersey. Without further ado, Mr. Mortensen.
Can you hear me now? Good. I've been invited to speak probably more often in this state than in any other on issues of higher educational opportunity. And as I went back through my data in anticipation of this, I was reminded of probably why I'm here. It's not just because Glenn Lang invited me out here years ago to educate the governor's staff about the fine work he was doing. And it's not just because Arnold Mitchum and Maureen Hoyler are up front here who have educated me about the issues that low-income students face. It's because New Jersey has really quite an outstanding record of support for students from low-income family backgrounds. I'm a numbers person, and you're probably going to be tired of the numbers that I put up here, but these numbers tell a powerful story. And the story is, when I rank states by their low-income college participation rate, New Jersey ranks #1 in the country. In 2016, you ranked #1. In 2015, you ranked #1. And I went back to the early 1990s, and every year since the early 1990s, you've always ranked in the top 5 and quite often #1 in the country. So something right is happening here in New Jersey that's not happening elsewhere. There's a special mix of programs, of people, of initiatives, of support that produce results like this. It's a human capital economy, and it's imperative that young people get the higher education they need to participate in that economy successfully. I've been a higher education policy analyst since 1970. I've been studying underrepresented populations in higher education for almost half a century. It's now, I think it's 48 years. I study low-income first-generation students, I study underrepresented minorities, and I study boys, all of which are seriously underrepresented in higher education. You'll see some of that data up here today, because I want to go through this issue of who gets a bachelor's degree from higher education in terms of family income backgrounds. If you don't remember anything else that I say today, remember this chart. Virtually everything I have to say comes out of this report, this analysis of Census Bureau data that we've done each year since 1970. It basically spans my career. If a student is from the bottom quartile of the family income distribution, and that's below about $39,000 a year in 2016, about 11.5% of these kids are going to complete a bachelor's degree by age 24. 11.5%. They're going to graduate from high school and go on to college and complete a bachelor's degree by age 24. Somewhere in the vicinity of about 11.5%. Your chances of completing a bachelor's degree by age 24 go up to almost 20% if you're from the second quartile of family income, between about $39,000 and about $74,000 of family income. Your chances double again to about 40%, 41%, if you're from the third quartile of family income. That is, families with incomes between about $74,000 and $127,000. And then your chances go up even further to about 58% if you're from the top quartile of family income, and these are kids who come from families with incomes of over $127,000 in 2016. You can see the patterns over time. Low-income students have always had the lowest chance of completing a bachelor's degree. Second quartile have had the second lowest chances, and so on. Clear separation across family income levels. And I want to emphasize up front here, family income is what an academic might refer to better as a socioeconomic status indicator. It's not just money, it's other things that come along with money, like parental education. And I want to talk about that when we get down to the latter slides in this presentation. Clear advantage to students who are born into the top quartile of the family income distribution. Why is this important? Well, there are hundreds and hundreds of correlates of educational attainment that say that people with more education live happier, healthier, longer lives than do people with less education. I'm going to focus on just one of these correlates, and that is earnings of workers in the economy. In 2015, a worker from the bottom, who had less than a high school diploma, average annual earnings were about $25,000. For high school graduates, it goes up to about $35,000. In other words, just graduating from high school will add about $10,000 to your family income. For those with some college or an associate degree, it goes up to about $39,000. And then it jumps sharply to about $65,000 for those who have bachelor's degrees, and to about $92,000 for those with advanced degrees, master's, PhD, professional degrees, post-baccalaureate degrees. A very clear advantage to income and everything that income is correlated with, associated with educational attainment. And if you look at the changes over time, between 1975 and 2015, average annual earnings have actually gone down by about $2,000 for high school dropouts. For those that drop out of high school, life is brutal, and it's getting more brutal because we simply don't need people with less skills for the highest paying jobs. We really need people with the kind of education and training that you get when you go to college. For people with just a high school diploma, average earnings are up by about $1,000 in constant dollars. For those with some college or associate degrees, are up by about $2,000. And then we get this big jump to the bachelor's degree, where average annual earnings are up by about $11,000. For those with advanced degrees, average annual earnings are up by almost $19,000 between 1975 and 2015. What's happening is the evolution of this human capital economy. In other words, the people that are succeeding, that are prospering in this economy, are those that have post-secondary education and training. Now keep in mind, I'm talking about this goal of getting to a bachelor's degree by age 24. And I'm going to use these quartiles of family income throughout this presentation to talk about other aspects of what's going on here. I want to start off by looking at how people from different family income backgrounds move through the education pipeline on this path towards a bachelor's degree. And this is high school graduation rates in 2016 by family income levels. They range from 61% high school graduation rates for those who come from families with less than $10,000 a year income, up to about 90% for those who come from families with incomes of over $100,000 a year. So on this path to a bachelor's degree by age 24, we're already starting to sort the field out according to the family income backgrounds that children are born into. It's not something they earn, it's just something that's assigned at birth. If we look at the same kind of data over time, by quartiles of family income, those quartiles that I laid out for you earlier. In the bottom quartile of family income, below about $39,000 a year, high school graduation rate for those dependent family members 18 to 24 years of age is about 76%. Goes up to about 86% in the second quartile, about 89% in the third, and a little over 90% in the top quartile of family income. What's interesting to me as I look at this is where the change has occurred. There have been significant gains in high school graduation rates for students from the lowest family income backgrounds. In this bottom quartile, the high school graduation rate since 1970 has increased by 14 percentage points. In the second quartile, it's up by 2 percentage points. In the third quartile, it's down by 1%, and in the top quartile, it's down by about 3%. these rich kids are sort of coasting through the K-12 system. And coasting usually means downhill. You don't make progress if you're coasting. But real progress here, and this is important, that the foundation for getting to a bachelor's degree by age 24 really begins with high school graduation. And in fact, the K-12 system has done a terrific job of improving the high school graduation rates for students who were born into this bottom quartile of family income. The second hurdle on the path to a bachelor's degree is continuing on into college if you have graduated from high school. This is the college continuation rate by those same family income intervals for students who have graduated from high school. Below about $20,000 of family income, high school graduation rates 52%, 57, 58%. For kids who come from families with incomes of over $150,000 a year, the college continuation rate is almost 89%. Virtually all of these kids go on to college. There's no great challenge there. If we look at the same kind of data then by family income quartiles, again, we're talking about people who have graduated from high school and show up in college as dependent family members in this 18 to 24-year-old age range, sometime in the 6 years after high school graduation. The college continuation rate is about 61% for those who were born into the bottom quartile of family income, about 68% in the second quartile, about 79% in the third quartile, and about 87% in the top quartile of family income. What I find interesting in this chart is that there has been virtually no progress in college continuation rates since about the early to mid 1990s. These lines are sort of flat. There was great progress in the 1980s, but since then, this progress is sort of flatlined. There is some growth. And if we look at that, changes since 1970, you see significant growth in college continuation rates across all levels, especially in the bottom 3/4 of the income distribution. Again, since I'm mainly concerned about this bottom quartile of family income, it's important to note they've made significant progress in high school graduation rates and college continuation rates for those that graduate from high school. Significant progress, because this progress fails once we get into higher education. The college participation rate is simply the high school graduation rate times the college continuation rate. You've already seen the data that leads into this calculation. So these students now have passed the first 2 hurdles on this path towards a bachelor's degree. For students from family incomes of less than $10,000 a year, it's about 36%. And it goes up with income to about 80% for those who come from families with incomes of over $150,000 a year. This sorting process by family income level is very pronounced even before we get into the performance of the higher education system, graduating students from different family income levels. So this is the college participation rates by quartiles over time. About 46% of dependent 18 to 24-year-olds will have reached college in some form. Goes up to about 59% in the second quartile, 70% in the third quartile, about 78% in the top quartile. Big change, mainly for the lowest income students. Then, here's where I have to get into an estimation technique, because my data source, the current population survey, doesn't answer this question directly. And so I have to combine some data from the longitudinal studies that the National Center for Education Statistics produces. And in fact, we can make a pretty good estimate of those who start college, what proportion will have a bachelor's degree by age 24. In 2016, about 24.5%, about a quarter, of those from the bottom quartile of the family income distribution, below $39,000 a year, will have completed a bachelor's degree by age 24. Keep in mind, this is of the population that got into college, so we've already done some of the deselection in high school graduation rates and college participation rates prior to this. We're talking about people who at least get into college, and the proportion having a bachelor's degree by age 24, 24% in the bottom quartile, about a third in the second quartile, about 59% in the third quartile, and about 3/4 of those who are from the top quartile of the family income distribution. In other words, the real sorting in terms of completing a bachelor's degree occurs in higher education. This is the change in the estimated completion rate for those who start college by quartiles of family income. In the bottom quartile, below about $39,000 in family income in 2016, the estimated bachelor's completion rate increased by about 2.5% since 1970. It increased by about 10% in the second quartile of family income. It increased by about 33% in the third quartile and about 20% in the top quartile. My colleagues at the Education Trust have called higher education the engine of division, something that divides society. K-12 and even the transition into higher education has done a pretty good job of helping low-income students prepare for and get into college. But the higher education system as a system is the most brutal of the three sorting stages in higher education. Higher education really doesn't do much at all for students from the lowest income families in the United States by raising prices and by trying to shift financial aid away from need-based grants into loans and other forms of financial aid that low-income students either don't have access to or don't find useful. We've really done a pretty good job of expanding baccalaureate degree completion for those who were born into the top half of the family income distribution. So then this is the first chart that I put up there. We're back to where we began this analysis. If you multiply the high school graduation rate times the college continuation rate times the estimated bachelor's degree completion rate, you get the estimated share of the population that will have a bachelor's degree by age 24. In the bottom quartile, in the bottom quartile of family income, about 11% in 2016 of the kids will have made it over all three hurdles. It jumps to almost 20% in the second quartile. It doubles again to over 41% in the third quartile and goes up by almost another 20 percentage points to about 58% in the top quartile of family income. Higher education really functions as the engine of division in the education system. It is enriching the rich and impoverishing the poor. That's why I've spent the last 48 years of my life trying to address this issue. Here's the changes in estimated bachelor's degree completion rates over this period of time, almost 50 years now, 45 years. In the bottom quartile, chances have improved by 5.1 percentage points, 8.7% in the second quartile, 26% in the third quartile, 18% in the top quartile. When politicians are talking about helping the middle class, this is what they mean by the middle class. These are kids who come from families with incomes roughly between $75,000 and $125,000 of family income. They've done a good job of helping rich people. Now, this is a transitional chart. In the remainder of my presentation, I want to talk about what's going on, to the extent I understand this, in differentiating students from different family income backgrounds. Most of my work has been on higher education finance and college affordability. I understand that very well, but I'm going to be talking about some things here that I really don't understand very well. Maybe you do, but they're clearly related to this differentiation across family income levels. In this chart, this is data from the the National Center for Education Statistics, 6-year graduation rates for students who began their collegiate study in a 4-year institution, broken down into 4 groups. Low-income first-generation students, low-income but not first-generation students, first-generation students who are not low-income, and then students that are not low-income and not first-generation, okay? If you are both low-income and first-generation, about 32% of that population will complete a bachelor's degree within 6 years, someplace, not necessarily at the institution they started out at. But your chances go up to almost 50% if you're low income but not first generation, or if you're first generation but not low income. Think about that. And then if you are neither low income nor first generation, your chances go up to about 71%. What I see in this is my interpretation, others might have a different interpretation, about half of what we're looking at in terms of differences in bachelor's degree completion rates across family income levels is attributed to income, and about half of it is attributed to other factors. And in my career, as I said, I spent most of my time studying college affordability because we have a lot of data on college affordability. We've done a wonderful job collecting data through the National Post-Secondary Student Aid System. And I have less clear data, but I want to talk about that, about the social, cultural issues involved across income levels. And then there's a third category called adverse childhood experiences that I know relatively little about, but is clearly a new field for us to understand the disadvantages that some students have when they come to higher education. So, I want to start off by having this little primer. This is a 1-slide primer on what's happening in higher education finance in the United States. This is data from the National Income and Product Accounts. Since 1952, we have 3 sources of revenue for financing higher education. We have the federal government down here at the bottom. We have families, students and their families, which we call personal consumption expenditures. And then we have state and local government. And over this period of time, if you look at the total expenditures on higher education and who is contributing what, you see the federal government coming on board in the late 1950s when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, and I was affected by that. My own education was affected by that. And the federal government said we have a science technology gap with the Soviet Union, and the federal government had an interest in infusing money into higher education to try to close that gap. And since in the 1960s, 1970s, really up to the present, roughly 10 to 12% of higher education revenues come from the federal government. The main story is this shift in the finances of higher education coming from families, students and their families, versus state and local governments. From 1952 up until about 1980, the share of higher education expenditures paid by students and their families was declining quite sharply, from about 50% in the beginning, from a high of 53% in 1954, down to a low of about 33% in 1981. At the same time, the share of state and local government expenditures was increasing from about 50% in 1952 up to about 58% in 1975. And then in the late 70s, the sea changes. Higher education, initially thought of as a public good, was increasingly described as a private good, and therefore taxpayers shouldn't pay for it, students and their families should pay for it, without any real sensitivity to the question of which of those families could afford to pay for it and which ones could not. So you have this enormous cutback in state and local government share of costs of financing higher education from 58% down to 35%. Massive shift, massive cutback, year after year, relentless. In state budgets, what's really happening is that healthcare costs are displacing virtually everything else in state and local government budgets. Until we get healthcare costs under control in this country, higher education and K-12 education and just about everything else that states want to spend money on is being sacrificed to support this expansion, virtually unlimited expansion of healthcare costs. Massive cost shift then from state taxpayers back onto students and their families. This is a very simple summary of the way I view college affordability. If you look at, I'm sorry, these buttons are close together on this clicker and I hit the wrong one. If you look at costs of attendance across family income levels, costs of attendance tend to increase with family income. Students from higher family income levels tend to attend higher cost institutions. Students from lower family income levels tend to attend lower cost institutions. This is less than $10,000 family income. This is greater than $200,000 over here. When a financial aid officer looks at something like this, they say, well, we have a college budget. This is our cost of attendance budget. And we've asked you to fill out the FAFSA so we know what your Pell Grant is going to be, what needs you have. And they come along, in addition to the Pell Grant, with state grants and institutional grants, and then they start packaging in loans and maybe some college work study. And what you end up with is a financial aid package that falls well short of costs of attendance. Now you have to break this down by sector, have to break it down by year, which I'll do in a moment. But you have this huge amount of unmet financial need for students from roughly the bottom half of the income distribution. And we have overmet need. We're still giving grants and tuition waivers and merit scholarships to rich kids. It's something I've never really understood. I understand financial aid officers typically don't control those kinds of decisions. Somebody else in the marketing department of the institution wants to recruit alumni or international students or merit scholars. And so they tend to set aside some money. But even when the expected family contribution greatly exceeds cost of attendance, we're still giving financial aid to these rich kids. I think this is what finances new cars and spring break in Florida, where I live in the wintertime. Our beaches fill up with a lot of you northern college kids, not in this room necessarily, but the ones that aren't in this room. You're down in Florida partying. This is our unmet need analysis. We have a parallel kind of analysis for student work loan burden and net price to family and the net price tax on family income. It's a longer presentation and I didn't have time to share that with you today, but believe me, the financial barriers are large and growing for students who come from the bottom quartiles of the family income distribution. We've done these NPSIS National Post-Secondary Student Aid Studies since 1990 through 2012. The 2016 results will be out sometime this spring. And when we look at unmet financial need in constant dollars, unmet need for students from the bottom quartile of the family income distribution was larger in 2012 than it had been in any of the prior NPSIS study years. We're seeing the same kind of pattern now in the second quartile between about $40,000 and about $75,000, $80,000 of family income. The second quartile is starting to look like the the bottom quartile in terms of family income. This third quartile has always been a mixed bag. It depends on the sector, depends on how hard an institution wants to recruit students from this income range. But then look at this high income sector up here. I can see a new car or a couple of nice spring break vacations, maybe a winter break vacation in Hawaii in that kind of data. The second category of issues that I want to lay out, I'm going to use one example here. We've looked at high school graduation rates and college continuation rates by quartiles of family income, controlling for gender and race ethnicity. And in this case, what I want to do is highlight one group of students, Asian students. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to identify one particular group, may not apply to any one particular person here. But I want to show you something that I see in the kind of data we get from the Census Bureau. In the bottom quartile of family income, the highest high school graduation rate is amongst the Asians. That's also true in the second quartile of family income. It's not true in the top two quartiles, but Asians have a higher high school graduation rate when you've controlled for income than any other group. The college continuation rate is even more dramatic. Asian college continuation rate about 91.7% for students from the bottom quartile of family income, compared to 91.7% from Asians from the top quartile of family income. There is something unique about the Asian population. Typically, TRIO programs are organized around addressing social and cultural disadvantages of low-income students, and this applies to whites and to blacks and Hispanics notably. It doesn't seem to apply to Asians. Now, I'm not an expert on this, and I can be challenged on this, but I read a paper by a Japanese scholar one time that said, until you understand something about the role of Confucius in Asian thinking, you won't understand the data that you're seeing. And his interpretation was Confucius, 2,500 years ago in China, taught that the highest form of human development wasn't to be a rich person and was not to become a powerful person, it was to become an educated person. And whenever, one of my lifetime hobbies has been sponsoring the resettlement of refugees from Vietnam and Laos. And I've seen extraordinary progress in the lives of people born in, who came to this country with all of their belongings in a cardboard box, many of whom now own houses larger than my own. In one generation, they've made absolutely extraordinary progress. And what I hear from these families is parents almost harassing their children about their schoolwork from the very beginning. And that may not occur in families, white, Hispanic, black families, where the parents don't have college education. More often, the mother tends to carry that role in families. But in any case, the Asians really stand out. I've got to wrap this up, so I just want to go to one last slide. And this is something that I know nothing about. I will tell you that up front. But I was introduced to this by a social worker up in Minnesota who happens to serve as a pastor in a church that I worship in on Sundays when I'm in Minnesota in the summertime. He places children in foster care situations, and he introduced me to this body of research developed out in California originally and now supported by the Centers for Disease Control on adverse childhood experiences, ACE. You'll hear about ACEs. These include incidents of child abuse, either physical or emotional or sexual, or disruptions to families like divorce or alcoholism or drugs or incarceration. About 40% of all children do not have any of these experiences in their development. But many of us do, including me. Alcoholism was an issue in my family. Amongst poor children, there tend to be an accumulation of these adverse childhood experiences that are quite traumatic in brain development. And the end result of this research is that students that have higher levels of adverse childhood experiences in their early years are the ones least likely to go on to college. And I think we need to understand that and address that. Okay, my last slide. If you want a copy of either this presentation, which you have, or the longer presentation, since I took out about half of the slides that I originally wanted to present, send me an email and I'll send you the longer PowerPoint presentation. There's more to this analysis, but the story is the work we do with low-income first-generation students is critical, absolutely critical to addressing developmental issues that they face in preparation for getting into and getting through college. I wish we spent a lot more time on college affordability, because even if you did a perfect job of addressing all of their needs, they still have to figure out how to pay for college. And the current financial aid system really does a very poor job and a deteriorating job of addressing their financial needs. Thank you very much.
Our next part is our panel, so it's not over. But if you have questions, Tom, if you want to take any questions, you can go to the microphone for Tom. He's going to go walk down, and then we're going to get a panelist. We're going to start getting, we're going to put the chairs up here. But are there any questions that you might want to ask at this time? Tom? Go ahead, Moses Kim.
My name is Moses Kim. I work for Student Support Services, SSS. Before I want to ask a question, I want to share my experience. I'm an Asian. When I was a high school student, I went to school. I rented a room from 7th grade, and I cooked, and I made a lunchbox and went to school and came back and studied. My routine was go to school and come back and study. That was the only thing I did during the middle school and high school. My question is, you shared the wonderful data, but I want to know the population of each quartile.
The study that I put together is based on a study done by Lee Hansen, a professor of economics at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And Lee's original analysis was to discount the Pell Grant program as effective in meeting student needs. And I thought he was wrong, and everybody else in the financial aid community thought he must be wrong. And we went back and looked at his data, and it was right. What Lee did is he divided the population of high school graduates into those above and below median. So exactly half were above median, exactly half were below. He couldn't find where the introduction to the Pell Grant program had improved low-income college participation rates. In fact, it was a much more complex problem than Lee originally laid out. I went back 10 years later, and on the advice of other people who had criticized the original study, broke the population down into quartiles of high school graduates. So we have exactly 25% in each quartile of high school graduates. Exactly. I'm more than happy to show you the workbook that has all of the raw data in it, but that's where all of this is laid out. Quartiles are quartiles. 25% of the high school graduates come from families with incomes below about $39,000 a year. 25% come from families with incomes above $127,000 a year. Yes?
Carlos?
Thank you. I wondered if you could give us some insight into how this dynamic takes place across the country, because we're looking at data that represents the entire country, correct? And so, you made some laudable comments about New Jersey early on, and so I'm curious, to what extent this is impacted by urban versus rural, and also by different sections of the United States.
All of the above. There are one of the advantages of New Jersey is you have both state and federal outreach programs, TRIO programs, and your state programs, and New York does too. And Pennsylvania used to, but the government sort of zeroed out funding for these kinds of programs in Pennsylvania. It's the only part of the country where you have these state programs, strong state need-based grant programs, and strong state outreach programs, preparation, supportive kinds of programs. There are parts of the country, I would say 40 of the 50 states don't have state need-based grant programs worth spitting on. They're just pathetic. In fact, the next newsletter that I'm going to write up is challenging states that have been cutting support for higher education so that public institutions raise tuition to offset the loss of state support and provide no need-based financial aid for their students. They tend to be Western states. They tend to be Southern states. Some states will brag about their merit scholarship programs. I'm sorry, those don't serve poor kids. They don't serve minority kids. They serve rich white people. They're designed because rich white people vote. Their elected officials are responding to people who put them up in office. So yes, there are strong regional patterns around the country. New Jersey, New York always tend to stand near the top of the list because there's an obvious, strong historical commitment to these kinds of programs. It weakens considerably if you get outside of the northeastern part of the United States and the upper Midwest. Outside of California, the programs are much weaker. California is an exception. Strong programs there.
Okay. I'm going to invite our panelists up. Thank you. So at this time, I'm going to introduce, I have all our panelists are here. Make sure we get you a drink of water, because there's a lot, so we'll get out to you to get you some water. Since we didn't send it. Everybody all right? You ready? Let's give a round of applause for Tom Wilkinson. Tom, you're supposed to be up here. You're still a part of the panel. I hope that was informative. I appreciate that. I think we'll make sure that we get those notes and research to the Chancellor as well. I want to introduce a colleague and friend and leader of the School of Arts and Sciences Education Opportunity Fund program, largest program in the state. It is a great program. It's been a model for all of many of the initiatives that we've had, and that was one of the reasons that we have asked Michelle Shostak, Dr. Michelle Shostak, to lead the panel discussion and then serve as a moderator. But we appreciate you, and we're glad that you're willing to do this, and we want to commend you and the entire team here, all the work that you do on behalf of our students. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Dr. Whitley. When I was asked to moderate this panel, for me, this was like, yes. It didn't take me a second to think about it because these are superstars. And some people admire movie stars and sports figures, but these to me are the people who I admire. So I am so thrilled to be here this morning. So the way we're going to do this panel is we're going to have the panelists introduce themselves. We'll have about an hour for questions for the panel, and then we're going to open it up to everyone. So as you're listening and ideas come to mind, jot down your questions, because there will definitely be time for you to ask as well. So let me start off by asking the panelists briefly to introduce yourselves, to share with us your research or your experience on either being a first-generation student or working with first-generation students. And we'll start right at the end with Dr. Whitley.
Thanks so much. I think we're still in the morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sara Whitley. I serve as the Senior Director of the Center for First Generation Student Success. It is a wonderful opportunity not only to get to do this work every day with wonderful colleagues, but as a first generation student myself, it is a real honor and a privilege to do this work. The center opened in June of 2017, so we're still in our infancy, and we are based at NASPA. If any of you, I know a couple of you I met this morning are NASPA members. NASPA is the largest international professional student affairs association. We have about 16,000 members across 2,500 institutions, and the center is based at NASPA in Washington, D.C. However, as Tom Morton said earlier, I very rarely make my way to D.C. I spend most of my time on the road these days. but excited to be with you all here today. Our partnership with the center is with a small family foundation in Texas, the Suter Foundation, who about 10 years ago took a real interest as a retirement project and why first-generation college students were not graduating. From there, developed the First Scholars Program, a cohort-based comprehensive model for student success over 4 years. We're partnering with the Suter Foundation to bring the First Scholars Program to the center, and beyond that, to develop opportunities for institutions to improve their support programs, to offer professional development for first-generation practitioners and scholars, to advance research and knowledge around first-gen work. And so I will be excited to hear from you all today and to learn about the work that you all are doing, and to learn how the center can help you all from day to day advance the work that you're doing at Rutgers. I'm going to pass it over to Maureen.
I'm Maureen Poindler. I'm the president of the Council for Opportunity in Education, which is a membership organization of about 1,000 colleges and universities that sponsor programs such as here at Rutgers that provide the non-financial support to low-income and first-generation students. And I got involved in this work as an undergraduate and kind of never left. So I'm delighted to be here, and as Sara indicated, we have so much to learn from Rutgers, and we have so much to learn from New Jersey that I think the work you're doing today is particularly important.
Well, good morning, Hashani Carter. I'm the EOF statewide director here in New Jersey. I am also the current president of the Tri-State Consortium of Opportunity Programs, which represents the New Jersey Education Opportunity Fund, all of the opportunity programs in higher education for New York, and also Pennsylvania. So total students around 40,000 plus to say. And so I have been involved with first-generation students, low-income students, students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds for nearly 2 decades. Yes, I probably look a lot younger than my actual age. But refrain, that's not a question I'm going to answer later. But it is something that I'm very passionate about, very committed to in helping, and I'm very happy to have been afforded the opportunity to be here today.
Good morning. I'm Henry Duran. I am a first-generation student. I am a low-income student when I went to college. And I am currently associate professor at University of Buffalo. Previous to that, I was for 25 years director of what's called the Core P. Maloney College at the University of Buffalo, which is a collection of every program at the school that has to do with low-income, first-generation, and underrepresented students. About 12 programs in all. And so, I'm very happy to be here. I thank whoever was responsible for inviting me, and I hope we have a good discussion.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. I have to say it's very exciting to be on stage. This is like my first time, so it's very nerve-wracking too. My name is Sara Whitley. I'm a current senior, double major in Human Resource Management Communications with a minor in Women and Gender Studies. I am a first-generation student myself, a very active participant of the TRIO programs. I am an EOF scholar. I'm a Student Support Services scholar. I'm a Student Access and Educational Equity Ambassador. I'm a work study student for SSS. On campus, I also perform as a resident assistant in the Residence Life program. And I just have to say that I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited to hear about the constant conversations about first-generation college students, low-income, underrepresented students, because it's a very important conversation that should be continuous. It shouldn't end. I know for myself, I have 3 younger sisters, so I want to see them do just as well and be just as supported as I was.
Hi everyone, my name is Jonathan Vitas. I am a current Rutgers University senior. I am also a Ronald E. McNair Scholar. I am majoring in psychology, minoring in women's gender studies with the aspirations of pursuing a PhD in social psychology, interested in prejudice reduction interventions, in particular through diversity initiatives that take into consideration socioeconomic status as well as the intersection of identities. Similar to, I believe, everyone else on this panel, I am also interested in understanding how we can ameliorate or at least find ways to apply interventions that truly engage the issues that are currently impacting individuals from certain areas such as lower income or people who are first generation, because I myself am too a first generation underrepresented low income student. And through my own personal experiences and considering how I am the first male in my family to even be attaining a bachelor's degree, I have qualitative experiences and intimate insight into understanding both the social cultural backgrounds as to what are some of the impediments that, in particular, Hispanics, males, that we encounter when we are attempting to attain a bachelor, as well as taking into consideration just structural barriers. So,
I think you've heard everything you need to hear from me.
Great. Let's jump into our first question, and this could be for anyone. What do you perceive as some critical issues facing low-income and/or first-generation students today?
I will start out. Tom kind of pointed out many of the issues: lack of financial aid, lack of the commitment of our generations to future generations, the stratification within higher education. Because if you have the concentration of upper income students in one type of campus and the concentration of first generation students at different types of campuses with different graduation rates and different investment, you have a recipe for non-equalization. A third thing that I would look at is the lack of political will, the lack of, how do you create the political will to give future generations, your generations, a realistic chance to graduate from college?
I went off to college in 1966, and I was truly the first generation student. I was the first in my entire family, and that's everywhere they were. I was originally from Georgia, but I lived in Ohio. I was the first of all the people in Georgia, all the people in Ohio. I was the first person in my entire church who ever went to college. And so what happened, and the only reason I'm saying that is because I see those same issues exist today. I had no idea what I was walking into. I walked into a college, campus that was truly looked like the ivory tower on the hill. There was, nothing of a cultural effect that I understood. Nowhere to get a haircut, nowhere to, you couldn't get, soul music on the radio channel. I mean, it was just all kind of things. Now, that wasn't the biggest issue. The biggest issue was the switch from high school culture to college culture, okay? The ethnic culture was a big deal. You get lonely and you wonder where you're going, but the switch from high school culture to college culture is huge, because there are things that go on in high school that don't go on in college. If you miss class for a couple of days in high school, somebody comes looking for you, right? They're paid, they on the payroll, If everyone does good, in Mrs. Jones's chemistry class, Mrs. Jones gets a lot of praise. If everyone does well, in Dr. Frank's chemistry class, people start questioning Dr. Frank's. They start talking about it's not college level or not rigorous enough. And it's just a lot of those kinds of things that a student has to learn that is different in the culture, and it requires that you make adjustments to what you previously thought and what previously made you successful, because they work almost 180 degrees against you. And so, I don't want to go belabor this, but if you have more questions, you can ask. But it's the biggest thing I see that students face is that they face a total shift in culture. Not only the surrounding culture that they live in every day, but also the shift from high school to college.
Can I build upon that just a little bit too? I would echo Maureen's comments and Dr. Grant as well. And also to add a little bit of a practical perspective to that, to think about the fact that the hidden curriculum is still very real for a lot of the students that we serve who are first generation and low income. And seeing, and I would probably exclude Rutgers in terms of the sort of forward-facing work that you all are doing in this conversation, but having institutions begin to think more about how they can audit policies and procedures on their campuses to become more student-ready, instead of thinking that students are just going to come prepared to navigate this massive web of complexities that we even have trouble as institutional administrators navigating on a day-to-day basis. And so I think there still is a real need for first generation and low-income students and those who from underrepresented populations to have the institutions take a close look at the way that we're continuing to serve students and to be a bit more progressive in the work that we're doing to support those students.
In addition to the conversation of access, inclusion, one of the cultural factors, and kind of piggybacking off of Dr. Duran, I think that first generation students are also faced with is the challenge of recognizing that they're changing socially at home from the home environment. When you become the most educated in your family, and that's a different dynamic, and some of you who are students may have experienced that amongst your peers, that it's just a different conversation. You're arguing differently because you're in a different place. And so you don't want to come across as disrespectful, especially if you're in a household where your parents are honored, revered in a certain way. But at the same time, you understand that they're limited in what they can offer and bring to the table for the conversation. And so I think that challenges a lot of young folks, and that can also create a separation, and why some students may not want to go home and engage in dialogue, because it's almost as if you're arguing with someone who doesn't have the context to argue. So that's one of the challenges that I think also has to be kind of accounted for.
Thank you. The next question is for our student panelists. As a student, beyond financial concerns, what have been your greatest challenges in navigating your college experience?
I'll go first. So, the one thing that constantly pops up in my head is that there's an eye out, there is knowledge that students are coming from low-income, underrepresented homes, families. Speaking for myself, I think there's a gap between expressing my college experience with my parents. How can I translate what I'm involved in on campus? How can I translate my achievements, my successes, and the meanings behind them to my parents in a way that they can better understand? I believe that for myself, speaking for myself, there could be other students like me, there's some difficulty in trying to make them understand that, EUF is a program that's supporting me because of this 1, 2, 3. I'm an apartment assistant because of 1, 2, 3. I receive these grants because of 1, 2, 3. So I believe that navigating my college experience is one thing, but going through it and then trying to explain and express that navigation to my parents is another. How do I explain to them the difference between just buying a textbook from Barnes & Noble's on campus and buying a textbook from check.com? How do I make friends on campus? What do I do? How many campuses do I travel to? Things like that. Those are things that I believe mostly affected me with my college experience in navigating.
To add to the same thing that she's saying, I too have a difficulty having this communication with my mom. I recently tried to just explain to my mom what exactly a doctorate means, and she's like, medical law? I'm like, no, there's other forms of doctorates. And just minor things like that, that it's difficult to really have them not only stand behind you and support you because they're not quite sure of what they're supporting, but at the same time, they're trying. And there's this state that you find yourself in. It's similar to what was being added earlier. It's like you are becoming the most educated person in your family. So, but there's also this like at-home hierarchy of respect almost. Like that you want to be respectful, but at the same time you want to be heard, and you're voicing the way that you want to articulate things are very different. So you find yourself being at home not as comfortable as you used to be. But then when I come to campus, I don't feel 100% comfortable either because I don't see a symbolic representation of me. I don't see a physical representation of me all the time. And it's like the only way that you're able to do this is by fabricating them or creating them or cultivating them. You have to find them. And I'm fortunate enough to have found this through the McNair, through my McNair cohort, through SAEE, through my partnership with the Latino Caribbean Studies Department, Women's Gender Studies Department. But I had to forge those. I had to find them. And it was thanks to these experiences in these environments and domains that really allowed me to not only be successful in an academic sense, but also find a form of union between my identities, because my identity at home is not the same identity here. Not saying that I'm like a polar opposite person, but there's just certain things that are appropriate at home that are not necessarily appropriate. I assume it's better to say that there's just certain things that I identify with at home that I wouldn't necessarily identify with in academia, and I have to find a way to navigate both and reconcile them. And I guess that might be the hardest thing when it comes to my experience as an undergraduate.
Thank you. Many institutions rely on the efforts of state or federally funded programs to support first-generation students. However, many of these programs face funding uncertainty on an annual basis. Do you anticipate continued funding challenges to programs that support and assist first-generation students, like the Educational Opportunity Fund, TRIO programs, and other similar initiatives?
So, our organization's principal reason for existing is to advocate for the federal freedom programs. And we have strong bipartisan support for the federal freedom programs on the appropriations, among appropriators, the people who give you money. We don't have as strong support among the people who write the law, what they call the authorizers. Either one of those groups could hurt you badly. So the only way you continue to provide growth in TRIO or in EOF is by cultivating people that are across the political spectrum, making sure that students and alumni interact with them and show the benefit of the programs. And I think because we have so many alumni who know that it was TRIO and EOF that provided that avenue for mobility, we are in a good place in terms of advocating for continued funding. Now, it's not going to be every year we're going to get this kind of increase. There's going to be good times and there's going to be bad times. But as long as you can mobilize people like yourself, the programs are going to be strong and they're going to grow. And you have to be able to be knowledgeable, and you have to be able to take advantage of the really good opportunities when they present themselves.
As a researcher, I believe the data that I put up there today. I think it tells a powerful story. But I can tell you from many experiences working with legislators, they don't listen to me. They listen to this guy and this student over here. If you get students up there telling their stories, it is infinitely more persuasive than the very best data argument that I can put together. Students have to lobby. They really have to get engaged in the political process and tell their stories. Their stories are far more powerful and persuasive when push comes to shove in the legislative process. The very best story that I can tell.
Yeah, I think I would agree. Opportunity programs have been in existence for 50 years now. think the oldest program might be 51 years this year, or 52. That means, however, that there are graduates of these programs who are now in prominent, influential positions who can make differences. In New York State, 20 years ago, 1995, the governor decided to completely cut opportunity programs out of the budget totally. And they had a little added sentence in there: these programs are a waste of taxpayer money. Okay? And it was only because of the advocacy, the students, and those alumni who had graduated from those programs that it was put back into the budget. And currently, a opportunity programs graduate is the head of the New York State Assembly. So this person, of course, increased, the funding to opportunity programs for the year that he could. So, I agree completely. I remember I started out, my first college job was working in Veterans Upward Bound. And I remember that every year there was a serious question of whether or not we would have a job next year because of the tenuous nature of the funding, and the going back. That no longer exists. And the reason that doesn't exist is because of I use the word advocacy because if you work for the state, you can't lobby. So because of the advocacy that we have put, into those programs.
Can I say though, we exist in an industry, higher education, that is very, very poor at advocating for low and first generation students, either internally on their own campuses or in the State House or in Washington. The leadership of higher education, the faculty in higher education are not fighting for low-income first-generation students. And so, as a recent passage of the tax law, they're not even particularly good at fighting for themselves as an institutional interest. So, the pressure, the students and the alumni can't carry the whole weight. Institutions have to be much more forceful at the state and the federal level in order for low-income and first-generation students to have a realistic chance to graduate from college.
So the short answer for me is yes, there's always going to be a challenge. And has been echoed at several points on the panel. We need to become more proactive instead of reactive. I think it's a natural tendency to respond when the cut happens. There has to be a continual education to the newer legislators. We have a newly elected governor here in New Jersey. Okay? We have a newly elected lieutenant governor. We have a number of new legislators. We have elections coming up for new offices. What are we doing as a higher ed community, and especially those within the opportunity program community, to educate on a bipartisan way about opportunity programs? And I think if you think about, I'll just give you a perfect example. Go to any legislative hearing where they talk about higher education. Most of the university presidents or representatives will be there to hear, listen, and talk about funding of higher education, but are they specifically talking about low-income students? You are part of the bigger picture, but they're focusing on the big picture. How much money is my institution going to be able to get? Are we going to be able to sustain ourselves? You have to advocate for yourselves. Because we are state officers in my office, we cannot go out and advocate. So students will say, well, what can you do? Well, I can give you as much information as possible, but I personally cannot go and say this needs to happen, okay? It's up to you all as individuals. Remember, and I say this in respects to anyone who holds a political office, their livelihood is based on whether they get reelected or not. but they can only make informed decisions when we as citizens inform them of our needs. Your institutional leaders here inform them of your needs. And as I said, especially to the younger generation who will say, you know, you gotta go to class, you gotta go to work, you have all these responsibilities, but yet 85% of you have some type of social media access. Are you doing anything to hold your institutional leaders, your elected leaders accountable via Instagram, social media platforms, Facebook, Snapchat? No, it's easier to put that the party was lit, I'm having a great time, than it is to say, hey, what are you doing about making sure that UF does not sustain any cuts this year? Okay. The only time I used to hear from students is when they owe something on their bill. They'd come to me and say, Dr. Carter, how am I going to pay this bill? And I say, well, the chapel's next door, we can go and pray. And while we're there, we can pass around the collection plate. I'll put $5 down on that. You know, as Mr. Mortensen alluded to earlier, the cost has risen astronomically. Okay, so it's really up to you all to be proactive to make sure that the future generation, like this young lady sitting at the table here with the iPad, can afford to go to college. Okay, not only yourselves. So.
Thank you. To all of the panelists, please provide your recommendations on how institutions of higher education can support first-generation, low-income students toward, and this is a multi-part question, so you could address any of the parts. One, increasing four-year graduation rates. We've seen that six-year graduation rates are a challenge, but increasingly there's been more pressure to graduate in closer to 4 years, increasing persistence and retention, and also something that certainly has been on the news recently, addressing mental health concerns. So again, feel free to jump in on any of those components.
I can get started here. And I would echo the previous comments that we've discussed in terms of we have significant work to do in terms of financial aid and the processes, sort of the larger systemic issues. What I'll do is I'll focus a little bit more on what we can actually do day to day on campuses. About 6 months ago, the Center for First Generation Student Success launched a national landscape analysis on first generation student success programs at four-year institutions. And I'm sort of now in that data analysis process and thinking a little bit about what we're learning from institutions across the country. Is thinking about different approaches, and as I mentioned earlier, student-ready approaches for supporting first-generation students that would lead to greater opportunities for retention and completion from semester to semester and beyond. And within that, having an opportunity to build upon not only mental health concerns, but thinking about social acclimation, belonging, all of those things that we know to be critically important in that work. What we're hearing a lot about and what we're seeing is particularly with first generation students in particular is the prevalence of very resource prohibitive cohort-based programs that are incredibly effective because they're high touch, they're getting lots of services through those programs, but thinking about what's happening on campuses in a lot of different offices. I recently met with an institution who had 6 different programs happening for first generation and low income students, and none of them knew about the other. It's a large public institution. And getting them in a room started a wonderful conversation around partnerships and opportunities to move forward. And so I think there are small approaches in terms of creating these network-based approaches, thinking about how we're presenting ourselves to externally. So thinking about changing our language, thinking about our websites, our recruitment materials, moving away from deficit-based approaches to more asset-based approaches, and thinking about ways that students are receiving our information is critically important to that work. And then to sort of tie back to our previous conversation, data. So, we're encouraging students to get on social media and students to think about, pushing the envelope towards our politicians and to our lawmakers. I would encourage practitioners and administrators to get on that same bandwagon. And part of that is digging in and collecting a lot of data. Collect data on your programs, qualitative data, quantitative data, thinking about, I probably 3 or 4 times a week right now I'm getting requests for institution level data on first generation student success. It's really hard to come by. But then take that data and equip your leaders. Use it yourself, but equip your institution leaders, get that moving, get that in tweets, get it however you can, use that data to push forward programs and the success you're having as high as possible so that it can be used at a much larger level than just what's happening in your particular offices.
Dr. Mortensen presented some really compelling data here about graduation rates of first-generation students. Virtually all of our opportunity programs exceed those rates, okay? And the reason we exceed those rates, now we're not where we want to be, okay, none of us, but the reason we exceed those rates is because most of what's considered best practice in retention and graduation has come out of opportunity programs over the years. Now, what's happened is colleges and universities have recognized it and said, wow, that's a good idea. Let's us start having, you know, an orientation program, or that's a, you know, good idea. Let's us start having, you know, academic coaching, or a tutoring program, and on and on. But if you trace it, okay, when you look at what happens with students in terms of retention, most of the advances have come from opportunity. Now, a lot of people don't know that because opportunity programs haven't gotten credit for it. But, you know, but that's where it came from. What I think we're going to have to do is scratch and claw, pull away the cover, and look deeper. Now, for example, what I mean by that, most students, when I was running, you know, all the opportunity programs at University of Buffalo, who had full funding, they were so low income that they got full funding. They got full Pell, full TAP, full, you know, whatever. Actually were the people who had the most money in their family. And so as a result, one of the things they tried to do was send money home, okay? Some of you probably are doing that too, you know, working and, you know, and that kind of stuff. Now, that has some kind of effect and impact on retention and graduation. They try to work an extra job when we fight against it, try to keep them, you know, just focusing on their studies. I mean an off-campus job, not work study, you know, that kind of stuff, and those kinds of things. And so, you know, that's something that I've never seen it explode. You know, how does that come into play? And, you know, from my perspective, there are lots of other, those kinds of things. You know, we hear a lot about non-cognitive indicators of success. Well, you know, a lot of studies are showing that the students who actually come with those non-cognitive characteristics and traits, you know, the ability to deal with, you know, adversity, the willingness to accept guidance and direction, and on and on and on, actually do well. But we've not looked at those closely, you know, those kinds of things. And so I think all of those kinds of things, you know, have a lot to do with that retention and graduation.
For EOF, one of the things we recognize is the increasing quality. And so I think that's very important because institutions will focus on retaining students, but that student is going nowhere. I had a student who was a freshman by credit for 3 years in a row. They're technically a junior, that's what they would tell their friends, but when I sat down and I talked to them, I'm like, you know you're still a freshman, right? They were retained, but there's issues with that, right? And so, you know, they weren't making SAP, we had to make appeals, all of that. So we have to have a discussion about persistence and what are we doing to help students persist. And a lot of times, students are packaged with scholarships that have GPA requirements. So you bring in students who come in academically challenged, but you put this weight on them to maintain a certain GPA. If they don't make that GPA, they're at the threat of losing their financial aid. So now we have already created the environment that's going to create more stress and a potential loss for that student, all right? Some of you students in the room are probably stressing out whether or not you're going to make that GPA requirement so you can keep your financial aid, all right? So again, to Tom's point earlier, need-based is more imperative in some instances than academic-based, okay? So I think we also need to create a new narrative about how we evaluate credits and what we give students credits for in the degree attainment process. Some of the students are business majors, and they're actually working 25-hour jobs. Some of them are managers. They're getting real-life experience, but yet that doesn't equate to credits towards graduation. So I think we have to rethink that narrative on how we're approaching giving students credit so that they can reach the finish line faster. And again, in terms of mental health, the last thing I'll mention is I think it's critical, and I know this may be taboo on certain college campuses, but I'm a huge proponent of cross-training, okay? Counselors in the UF program are the first line of individuals who work with and get to know the students in the most intimate way. But a counselor who only knows how to advise students on academics and maybe how to help them address some of their issues, but doesn't understand financial aid, is leaving that student in a situation where now they have to travel across campus, go wait in a very long line to speak to someone at financial aid who's probably already stressed out as it is, because everyone's come to them about what? Their bill. So if there's some type of cross-training that can happen for counseling services, we're not saying that they're certified counselors, but to be able to identify and maybe start that intervention conversation to guide them to the proper resources, I think will be critical to the success of the students and being able to be retained, persist, and graduate.
I think Dr. Durant mentioned that many of the practices that we need to look to came out of opportunity programs. And I think that probably what we need to do to start answering this question is going back to Dr. Whitney's introduction, because he mentioned so many of the things that Rutgers is doing that are exactly the right things. But if you put them in categories, probably one of the first things is you've got to provide peer support. You've got to look at how you can form cohorts of students that are going to support each other, whether that's living learning communities, whether that's what you do in your student support services program. You've got to make sure that the student is supported by other students. Secondly, you know, when you talk to alumni of programs, they almost always point to one person, a director of a program, a counselor of a program, somebody who was always there for them, could direct them to the appropriate person on campus. So you've got to make sure you're not just talking about services, that you're really talking about putting people into people's lives that will, in fact, be able to support them, adults into younger students' lives or older students' lives. Thirdly, I think you really need to look at what they now call high-impact practices, whether that's undergraduate research, whether that's study abroad, whether that's civic engagement, making sure that students are doing something that is meaningful intellectual work that makes sense to be in a college to do it. So those are, and then the fourth thing is just experience. One of the things about college that they need to have enough time to be a student. They can't always be workers who happen to be taking a class. They have to be engaged students. And those are four things to look at, and I think four things that Rutgers is doing a particularly good job at doing for their first generation students.
Thank you. The next question is for any of the panelists. What are some methods for gaining institutional and community support for access programs and other initiatives that support first-generation students?
Okay, I'll speak. You want to gain institutional support by allowing the institution to understand the great job that you do, okay? All too often, I don't think that's the case at Rutgers or, in any of the New Jersey areas or some of the opportunity programs, but all too often, the programs that service low-income first-generation students are tucked away, out of sight and out of mind. Sometimes you can't even find them, in terms of where they are. And oftentimes, the staff prefer it that way because they're off the radar screen. We don't want to be that. And you can tell immediately when you come here to Rutgers, that that's not the case, because everybody's out, everybody knows about the programs, and so forth. But what we have to do is we have to publicize our successes. I used to have all my programs develop what I call a brag sheet, and you take every student you got who's doing an exceptional job. You develop their story, and then what you do is you publicize it. I don't care if it's the student newspaper, I don't care if it's a local article, whatever. I don't care if you have to write it up and put it on your wall outside your desk, because everybody needs to know that our students are as good as and frequently better than everybody else in this institution, okay? Now, one of the things, and I think, what I know about New Jersey, that already happens, but in some of our New York areas and Pennsylvania, I think we need to get better at it, is that you have to allow the rest of the campus to become engaged and involved. One of the things we used to do is we used to invite the admissions people and the financial aid people and those individuals who only saw the students on one specific occasion to our award ceremony. You see, those of us who work in opportunity programs, we get to see these young people who come in as, rough, stones, and we get to watch them as they get polished and smooth. And then at the end, when they graduate, it seems like a natural thing to us, because we've watched them transition. But the person in admissions only sees them when they admit them. And all they know is that they were that rough edge person, and they don't get to see them when they come out polished and making clear and just, speeches and stuff like that. And so the more we can get our institution engaged, the president completely changed, at our institution, changed his mind when he heard the young kids tell their story. When they talk about where they started and what they dealt with, and he saw where they are now, he said, my God, nobody does this. But yeah, they are. Everybody in the program does it, And so I think that that's one of the things that we got to do. We got to let the institution, get a sense of the young people that we work with, as well as, their successes. And when they get out, and then we have, I'm going to stop.
I will continue on that notion that we need to create greater support across our institutions, and I think a way that we can do that, as Maureen said earlier, people matter, and there's usually a person that a student can point to that led them through their experience and really helped them. And I've been really surprised in talking with institutions across the country how few are actually tapping into resources beyond people who have this as a part of their job description, whether that be directly with opportunity programs or with particular maybe institution-based specific programs or even financial aid and those kinds of areas, but actually going out and having a public place where faculty and staff on your campus can identify as being first generation or a particular identity, putting that on their office door, working it into their syllabi, having it be a part of their introduction on their first day of class, creating that notion on campus that being first generation or a first generation low income student or a TRIO alum or one of those things is a proud part of their history and their experience and the reason that they're in the positions they are now. And so encouraging your campus to do that. There are a number of institutions who are doing a really great job with this. The University of Virginia has their Who's First program. Every faculty and staff member on their campus has a sticker for their office door. There's a website that you can visit that has all of the first gen faculty and staff listed, but from there they go on to create mentoring programs around that. They invite those people to become speakers. The reciprocal piece from that too is equipping those people with information. Give them your brag sheets. Give them your data that you're collecting, because maybe they're in a faculty council meeting that you can't be a part of as the practitioner responsible for your programs. Let them help you make that transition to more information to more people, and spread the word around that overwhelming need for more support around our programs, and also to reflect the great things that are happening with our students.
Thank you. Great. The next question is for our students, but any of our first-generation panelists are welcome to weigh in as well. What type of support have you received that has been impactful in your success?
I think it's very interesting how everyone has been touching on the fact that there's this sense for accountability and mentorship and guidance, because I would say I attribute the majority of my success to my connections with the McNair faculty, the SAEE, with all my advisors, both on an academic sense, but as well as them understanding me more on a personal level, understanding my social cultural background. It's allows me to identify with certain spaces I would have never identified with. I also love the fact that one of the most daunting things, I don't love this part. One of the most daunting things about coming into college is the lack of knowing. I came into Rutgers University 3 years ago, and I just didn't know of the opportunities. I didn't know I didn't know much. I'm the first person in my family to attend college, so a major and minor. I'm not sure what I want to do, but it was through having advisors who had information that I had not any prior knowledge to. And they understood the way that the natural progression of college goes through, what courses it take, what are you interested in. They allowed me to envision myself 5 years ahead, something I didn't do in high school. Even like simple things like teaching me how to be organized and keep a planner, and touching bases with faculty members, taking into consideration networking opportunities. These are social capital building habits, behaviors that you don't necessarily have, you don't bring into college, that it's very important to have a mentor or an advisee who knows where you're coming from, that can also instill these things in you. And it was through having these experiences, and it's interesting, everyone says there's that one person. There's a few, but I mean in the crowd right now, there's Ms. Jana, and, well, she wasn't here. She was here, Dr. Whitney, Dr. Benson Fuentes. There's so many people within this crowd alone that I have personally been given an opportunity to not only speak with, but also have the opportunity for them to just help me understand and acquire the information and take advantage of the opportunity that Rutgers has provided me.
Thank you.
Definitely to piggyback off of that, it's definitely the people that we interact with. It's definitely starting from our counselors, sharing these resources, and then the key is to have the willingness to go to those resources and actually put in that effort to attend these workshops that Student Support Services provides, to participate in those modules, to go to EOF events, to attend SAEE events, to apply for that resident assistant position. It's that motivation that these specific individuals continuously give you throughout your college career, because that's what's happened with me, that really drives us to our achievements, to our success. Personally, for myself, I was fully funded to attend an alternative spring break in the Dominican Republic, completely out of my own culture, completely like dreams that I never thought would be fulfilled because I can't afford it. However, because I knew these programs, because I was a part of these programs, because I was a scholar, because I spoke to these people and took interest in doing so and actually applying for that grant, actually reaching out and asking for these funding, that's what got me to do the things that I got to do, and that's definitely what got me to be where I am today. I'm a senior today. I'm pursuing my master's degree in the fall, and I mean, I have nobody to thank for it but the TRIO programs, but the individuals that were involved in my pursuit for a career, in my pursuit for a happiness, in my pursuit to continue doing, to continue going, to educate myself. Those people that really motivated me, that continuously told me, yes, you can, instead of saying, no, you can't. I think that's really, really important. but definitely the willingness to do so, which I feel like many students may not have at the beginning, but it's definitely possible to make sure that they do, that they remember that you can create an identity for yourself, because definitely we've created identities for ourselves by making sure that we're involved, by having that support from those individuals, from our counselors, from the directors, from our connections, definitely.
Thank you, Sara. Did anyone else want to respond to that? What was most impactful in your success? So you had described being a first-generation student when you first started college.
I think somebody said it earlier on the panel. It's usually an individual, someone who believes in you, who thinks that you can do something, and I want to say something a little bit different, though.
Sure.
Okay. You also got to know something about your history, okay? And one of the things I did in preparation for coming to this panel is I studied some stuff about Rutgers. Bonnie, could you hand me that book? And and I don't know how many of you know about this book. This book is called Black Student Protest at Rutgers. And this book is written by Richard McCormick, who is a Rutgers emeritus history professor. And there's a whole chapter in this book about the development of EOF, okay, which I didn't realize until I looked it up, and there's a lot that says that there is a legacy here at Rutgers, okay, already. And what I think needs to happen is Rutgers needs to somehow advertise this to the rest of the higher ed world. You know, your background, your history, and what you believe in. You know, the very fact that you have this program says a lot about that. And so I think that has a lot to do with it. That means that you got a lot of people who believe in people. That's all.
Thank you, Dr. Durand. One more question for the panelists before we open it up to the audience. And Dr. Carter, I believe you alluded to this a little bit, but I'd like for everyone to be able to jump in as well. TRIO and EOF programs have relied on advocacy to sustain their funding. Please describe some tangible and effective ways to advocate in the 21st century and sustain advocacy support.
March 26th, EOF Student Day at the Capitol. I want to make sure all the students here are aware of that. It's an opportunity to make sure that you not only have your presence seen but heard. A number of legislators are going to be brought by. It is facilitated through the Professional Association and through the Alliance of EOF Students of New Jersey, not the EOF Central Office, although we will be there in participation. As I mentioned earlier, today I think it's easier to make yourself heard than ever before. Social media. I mean, institutions have created new divisions to just focus on what's being put out there about them, all right? Because they're very conscious that a tweet can get to 15,000 people in a matter of seconds than me standing out in the middle of the square saying, fight for EOF, okay? Legislators are also very conscious about their image, okay? So you'll be surprised how quickly somebody will respond. Cory Booker responds to social media tweets, you know. So this tells you where we are today in terms of advocacy. So writing a letter to your local legislator is important. You should do that, okay? But also holding your legislators accountable via social media, letting them know how, not only just the bad things. I think a lot of times we write whenever there's bad things that happen, like you're cutting us, I need my money. But share your success. Thank you. Because of your support, I was able to go here. I was able to do this. I was able to do some amazing things. And by the way, I am a voter, and that matters. And a lot of my friends are voters. That matter. So those are the things you want to emphasize when you're advocating, but be very specific in your ask, okay? And what do I mean by that? If you're asking for support, I can nod my head and say, yes, I support you. Here's your budget. You're like, wow, that's what you mean by support? I said I supported you. I didn't say how much, okay? I say that to my daughter all the time. She's like, Daddy, can we go here? I said, yes, but I didn't say I'd buy anything. And I'm doing that intentionally, not to make her feel bad at Toys R Us. But the teacher, if you don't come with a specific ask, I'm not going to be able to guarantee that I can get you what you want. You asked a question, I gave you an answer. It wasn't the answer I think you were looking for, but it was an answer that was satisfactory for me to be able to provide to you. So be very specific in your ask. That's very important. And hold them accountable to say, and what can you do to ensure that your colleagues are aware of the same ask? So.
I'd like to reinforce Dr. Carter's comments about vote. Very, very important, okay? And unfortunately, most college students don't vote. I always tell my students, listen, politicians, they pay attention to two things, money and vote. And you have no money. So if you want to get, some attention, you have to vote. At my school, an opportunity program student has been president of the Student Association about a third of the last 10 years. That's pretty big, that's pretty significant. That's like a $8 million budget, and you control all of the student clubs and the activities that go on and stuff like that. And so, how did that happen? Well, what I figured out, I started looking at it, is that even though we have a student body of about 30,000 students, there were very seldom more than 1,300 votes cast for the head of the Student Association. Most students didn't vote. So what we figured out is we had 1,000 students in EOB. If we could get them to all vote, right? And so forth. And, so we started doing campaigns at the football games and the basketball and so forth. And consequently, our students start getting 1,500 votes instead of 1,400 votes and became president of the entire student association, which made big differences in terms of what happened in the campus with respect to our programs. But more important is the legislators, which is what Dr. Carter was saying. And the students have to understand you must have a voting culture. You must have that. Other than that, you won't be able to have much influence.
I'd also like to take up Dr. Carter's comment. It's important that people ask the same question. And the only way you ask the same question is if you're organized. Because if everybody just asks for what they can get at Toys R Us, they're all going to be asking for Paw Patrol, and somebody's going to be asking for Superman and somebody else. But people have to say, we want a 15% increase in this funding. We want you to vote for this amendment. And the only way you can do that is if professionals and students are organized to ask the same question. So that's point one. Second thing is you want your coalition to be as big as it can be. And that's the power of first generation. There are first generation white people, there are first generation black people, there's first generation Asian. There are many people on boards of trustees that are first generation. And there's not many people who identify as low income so you want to take the first generation concept and really blow it up so that you can get support from all parts of New Jersey, not just the urban parts, but all across the state, because legislators come from all across the state. People go to Washington, come from all across the state. And it's easier to get heard in some of those places because the needs of the urban areas are so great for so many different things. So that's one of the reasons TRIO is effective. Surprisingly, the support we get from Idaho and Oklahoma might be greater than what we get from Illinois and New Jersey and New York, because there's, for two reasons. Big states are hard to get anybody's attention, but also the needs are so great, and there are more programs that meet some of those needs. So take that first generation and really use it to form a broad-based coalition.
I don't know if you all are aware, but I have read this. Now, I've never asked him this, but I have read that the term first generation was coined by Dr. Arnold Mitchell, okay? That he came up with that term. I don't know if many of you know him, but Dr. Mitchell is right here in this audience.
Please stand up.
Okay? And so this whole conference, which is called RU-1st, okay, meaning first generation, is a legacy of his work. I'm done.
Well stated. Good. And that provides the perfect transition to now go to our audience members for any of your questions. We have stand-up microphones, so please feel free to approach them. Ms. Coleman?
Yes. Hi. So I guess I met most of you earlier. So I was looking at specifically Mr. Mortenson's research, and I saw that in the book it was 2015 results, but on the slides it was 2016. So actually, a lot of them were indicating that it's actually a 2% decrease in graduation rates nationally since last year to this year. So I just was wondering, I mean, considering at Rutgers about a third are first-generation students, if a 2% decrease was to happen, that'd be about 300 students. And then over the past recent years, once a decline started at 2%, it went to about 5%. So my question is more for Dr. Whitley probably and Ms. Hoyler. What will your center or council do to stop this decrease from happening from 2% to 5%? That's a significant amount of students. So what can we do at Rutgers, or what can you guys do to stop that decrease from happening?
Jump in. Thank you. It's a great question and a very well-detailed question, so I appreciate that. So as I mentioned earlier, our center is new, and so we are really still in a foundational phase and thinking about the work that we're doing. We've actually had a wonderful opportunity to do a lot of partnership already with the Council for Opportunity and Education as well, and are grateful to Maureen Service and is kindly a member of our board as well, so happy to have that partnership. Really, I think from an institutional perspective, as I mentioned earlier, we really focus on supporting institution needs and thinking about support services. And so taking a lot, and as we mentioned earlier, a lot of the really incredible work that has come out of opportunity programs and helping to expand that on campuses to meet the needs of more students that are outside of those quota numbers that opportunity programs are allowed to serve. Helping institutions take a focus on first-generation college students from the practical level, from the entry-level professional, through faculty and staff, through the leadership and even through the Board of Visitors level, thinking about understanding what the needs are on particular campuses. What's happening on community colleges, there's different needs there than there are at four-year institutions, at public, private, geographic locations. So right now, a lot of it is awareness building and also professional development for practitioners and scholars, helping to get faculty on board with the work we need to be doing in classrooms. So right now, my focus is on really targeting what we can do at the institutional level to support students, more so than maybe an access level directly to students. Hope that's a start to your answer.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's only going to go up if two things happen. One, support services programs and access programs can serve more people. And that means we have to advocate more for EOF, we've got to advocate more for TRIO. We got to get more people served, and we've got to get the intensity of services to those individuals that it's going to make a difference. You can't assume that, two meetings when a student is in 7th grade is going to make the difference. It's got to be intensive and sustained service. And so I think that's really, really crucial. And then we have to put pressure on institutions to say that there's some things that are more important than their rating in U.S. News and World Report, and they're going to be judged by the public on whether they serve all the citizens of the state. And so we have to, and not just students, I mean, these adults, all the adults in the room have to say it's government's responsibility to provide access to higher education where people can go, where they don't have to take out huge loans, where they can have a good college experience. So we have to just fight more.
Thank you.
I just want to, you mentioned it was a couple of years ago that these completion rates went down. I just wanted to mention it was 2 years ago that the federal government created financial aid standards of academic progress. And that means that if a student has a certain GPA, a certain number of classes attempted but not completed, they're not eligible for financial aid. So we write, I'm the director of advising for the School of Arts and Sciences, and so we write something on the order of a couple hundred plans per year. We don't write the plans for the EOF students, so I know that a lot of the counselors here have written a lot of plans. Those plans typically, about half of the students that have that probationary status lose their financial aid at the end of the first semester of the plan. And that loss of financial aid for the majority of students is probably permanent because they are not eligible for financial aid until they return on their own dime to appropriate standards of academic progress. And the students' resources and the families' resources for coping with the loss of financial aid in many cases is virtually nil. And so I just wanted to point that out as a new obstacle that didn't really exist before. There were standards of academic progress, but those in the past were very modest and it caught up very few students. Now it's caught up really large number of students, and I don't know how many in EOF, but I know the number for non-EOF students in the School of Arts and Sciences is quite high.
That's very important, okay? You know, we on the campuses call it satisfactory academic progress, which is separate than what we have for the academics. So you can have kids still eligible for school, but not eligible for funding. Mm-hmm. You know, and that hurts them, you know, terribly. And we talked earlier about retention, okay, and persistence. But one of the most important things to retention and persistence is how a student performs the first year. Because if you, in fact, perform subpar your first year and you are able to continue, the chances are you will be a junior at best before you're back in good academic standing, provided that you have a good semester each, good meaning 2.0 or better, each semester afterwards. A student who winds up with a 1.5, okay, and then gets 2.5 the next 2 semesters, won't be good until their 6th semester. They won't be out of academic jeopardy. And so that first year is incredibly important, and we didn't pay attention to that enough, you know, in the past. And because they can lose their financing before they are academically ineligible to stay at the institution, it's virtually impossible for a student to get back into good academic standing if they don't do well first semester.
Thank you. Ms. Broderick?
I didn't know if you want to go down there. He's waiting.
Oh.
Okay. All right. Good morning. My name is Christina Broderick. I'm one of the program coordinators with Student Support Services here at Rutgers University. And my question relates back to advocacy. So I'm also a first-generation graduate, but I'm also first-generation American. And I grew up in a household where politics weren't talked about. It wasn't emphasized, the importance of being politically engaged. And now fast-forwarding to being on the administrative end of it, we're seeing a lot of students who still aren't getting the importance. We talk about it here in the room. We all know the importance, but they're still not coming out. We post things on social media, and they're scrolling past it. They're ignoring the emails. They're not really coming. We go to Policy Day down in D.C. We bring students, but it's a lot of work to try and just get them on that bus, right? So I'm wondering if you have any specific strategies as relates to the language that we can be using so they feel connected to the cause. They're part of our organizations, they're part of SSS and EOF, but they're not still connected to understanding the importance of really being politically engaged and how it relates to them on an individual level.
Well, first of all, you know, if our citizens were engaged, personally, if the country was engaged, we wouldn't be in the situation we are. Most people don't think of government as something that particularly affects them. So the fact that students don't is just a fact of, you know, it's just something that is a given as opposed to something that is a problem. So it's, but if we think of civic engagement as fighting for their futures as part of their education, then we have to be much more strategic about what we do about it. And that's one of the things COE is just starting to think about. When we worked with, when we started the First Generation Day, we went to NASPA and we went to AAC&U, and now we're going to ask you to see if we can work to make that more, because it's crucial not just to them being engaged, but also to their graduating, just as you said. So we don't have the answers now, but we're going to look to you to help us figure some ways to do it. But I do think peers are an important part of it, and how we engage groups of students is an important part of it.
I think it's important to understand how, or think about how to weave the educational aspect of what advocacy, or what's involved with advocacy in the curriculums that are presented to the students from as early as possible. I know as a former director of the EOF program, from pre-freshman summer, we would educate the students on advocacy, civic engagement, what this all meant, and include it as part of what we were introducing and teaching them, not just trying to assess and get them ready for the fall semester. So I think it's important that that part happens as early as possible and as consistently as possible. Now, the other part of this is a very real part. What's the incentive for them? Okay. They have very limited time. They probably don't want to do it. So what's the real nugget that's going to get them to come, right? So thinking of ways to build incentives for students to participate. You would get priority in X, Y, or Z, or you would get this. It's included as part of your letter of recommendation when we're writing for you to apply for scholarships, for whatever it is. And so students, I think, are also incentivized to participate if they know that there is an immediate return on their effort, okay? You know, they study for exams because they want to get an immediate return to see that they get an A. And so I think if there's a way to build in an incentive system, it doesn't always have to be monetary to say you want to keep your money, right? Yes? Okay, well then you should come. But there's other ways to get them involved, especially I think for students who have peers, or not peers, but siblings who are coming behind them to say, you know, you need to think about, you know, your sister or your brother, and wouldn't you want to make sure this existed for them. So thinking of ways to create incentives, I think, would also help.
Thank you. Last audience question.
Hi, good morning. My name is Mario Tando. I'm a project coordinator with Rutgers Future Scholars and a proud EOF alumni. My question is more along, so nationwide we are seeing a rise in undocumented students pursuing higher ed degrees. Based on your personal or previous experiences, what recommendations can you provide to ensure the success of undocumented students who are first gen, if any?
You know, I don't think enough of us are that familiar. You know, one of the things I try to do is I try to talk with all of my students about DACA and what that means. And it's amazing how many people don't even know what it means. Not just the words, they don't know if it's, you know, Deferred Act for Children, but they don't even know what that means. You know, that is young people who have come here to this country as, you know, babies maybe, or juveniles who have lived here their entire lives, and now someone's talking about sending them back to a country that they've never lived in, never performed in, that kind of thing. So I think part of it is education. We have to make, you know, people understand. Our programs are kind of in a bind in some ways, in that most of them you have to be a resident of the state in order to be a part of the program. And so if you're not a state resident, which means that you have gotten, you know, all the residency requirements necessary, that makes it a little more difficult in that. But, you know, I mean, in New York State, I think there's something like 33,000 students, you know, who are DACA students in college and that kind of thing. And so it's very important, you know, population kind of thing. Beyond that, you know, I'm not quite sure more than educating people. There are no student clubs that know anything about it, you know, on our campus.
Yeah, yes, here at Rutgers University we have Undocu Rutgers. It's an undergraduate student organization that has been started.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's good. But beyond that, I don't know what else to say.
I'll just quickly comment. As we were collecting data for our landscape analysis, we heard quite a bit from institutions who saw a primary struggle as being how to support their first generation DACA students, particularly from institutions in particular geographic areas of the country who said, I feel like I spend all day, every day doing this, and I don't feel like anyone else knows that I'm doing this all the time or around the country. So one of the things that we're working on now as a part of the Center's live briefing series is a number of professional development opportunities around supporting professionals who work with students who are undocumented, and then also for those who just need to create greater awareness. So speaking to Dr. Duran's point about education, thinking about how maybe there are more students on your campus than you realize that are going through these struggles, and also the implications for these students if they're, as one institution said, they're hiding out from services. They don't want to be identified, so they're not going to meetings anymore, they're not connecting with advisors, and they're starting to retreat from the institution a bit in an effort to sort of protect themselves. And so we'll be doing some professional development through the center and thinking about different ways to approach that topic and create greater support for those who are navigating it every day, but then also to create greater awareness for those who maybe aren't thinking about it maybe as critically as they could be.
Thank you.
I was just going to add real quickly. I think as you graciously came up and raised the question, one is to raise the issue, and two, it's to inform the solution of the problem. And so I think now that the issue has been heightened and raised nationally, both locally and nationally, we need for folks to inform the policymakers on how to create the narrative so that we can address the students appropriately. And so just raising the question, I think, is important, but it's really important to also find ways to engage in the shaping of the policies. And otherwise, we'll continue to have the question about
what's going to be done, how is it going to be done, what's going to be effective. And I always am a firm believer that those who are most impacted need to be at the table to have the dialogue on how the policies need to be shaped so that it can affect people in a very positive way. So.
Thank you. As I suspected, I only got through about 2/3 of the questions. So what we're going to do is give each panelist an opportunity to provide any final thoughts. So just about a minute if there's something that was on your mind that you didn't get to touch on yet, this is the opportunity. So Dr. Mortensen, let's start with you and we'll work our way down.
This can come out of left field, I assume. Okay.
Absolutely.
Congress is now considering reauthorization of the Higher Education Act. And for years, I've advocated major changes to our federal financial aid programs. One is calculating a negative expected family contribution and needs analysis and funding it with a larger Pell Grant, because very low-income students are often breadwinners in their family. And they have to work in order to provide for their family if they're going to leave their family and go away to college. Congress has had a choice many times about recognizing the negative expected family contribution, but as a matter of policy, it's chosen to zero out the negative expected family contribution from the FAFSA data. And I believe it should be both calculated and preserved and funded with an increased Pell Grant. Secondly, I advocate strongly a $14,000 Pell Grant maximum award. And mainly what I'm trying to do is to get students out of the loan programs. I'm sorry, I hate loan programs. It's like the federal budget deficit. We're simply taking from the future to fund today. And it's putting young people farther in the hole than they should be when they start off life with a college degree. They should be forming families and buying houses, and they're deferred from doing that until they can resolve their federal student loan obligations. A third recommendation that I would make, and this is in direct contradiction to what's currently going through Congress, I believe every student should have a college work-study job. There's just too much research that say that students who have college work-study jobs perform better academically, and frankly, given the lousy job market for young people today, I'm finding many young people coming into college never having had a job in their life. And if there's anything that college has to prepare young people to do, it's to go out and engage in the world of work. So there's an opportunity here with reauthorization of the Higher Education Act to address issues that I think should have been addressed decades ago, and I would like to see us not pass on that opportunity.
Thank you.
I believe one thing that's been on my mind this entire time, it's trying to see how we can, as an institution or just on a national level, try to create a new narrative around the concept of diversity in itself, and really try to explain not only how diversity on a physical level is important, but how it contributes to intellectual growth, and how higher education itself should be representative of the society that it comes from. So with that being said, I think that moving forward, we should really take into consideration how having voices from all portions of society, all sectors, especially those that are marginalized, to have an opportunity to contribute towards not only just the creation of policies and interventions, but as well as have their stories and their cultures taken into consideration. That's the only way that we'll be able to actually create a more holistic and comprehensive approach to these disparities that we're facing. I also, again, I agree wholeheartedly with what the conversation has been saying. I myself can attribute my own personal experiences of having to work and going to school. Being a low-income student is not the same as the individual who's coming from a more affluent background. There's just so many social, cultural just struggles that you have to face that you're coming into academia with. There's so many other things that are going on, such as being the breadwinner of your home. Your cognitive load is already at a compromised state going into academia. How am I expected to excel and reach my maximum potential if I'm already boggled down by problems that are going on at home? Boggled down with an imposter syndrome because I don't identify with this environment. At the same time, I'm also expected to contend with the things that everyone else is contending with, like, oh, these decisions are going to impact my career trajectory. These decisions are going to also impact what my life is going to become. when you take into consideration this whole composite of the experience, whether it be on a psychological or sociological level, you start to realize that in order to really start to create diversity that's really going to help out individuals from marginalized communities, you have to approach things holistically. You have to take all things into consideration. The personal, the public, it's all one. And in order to do so, I think that we need to start to consider how we can facilitate access and communications for people who have not been heard.
Something that's always been on my mind since I got into my senior year, and something that I actually advocated for as a speaker at a leadership conference in Florida back in October. We don't really think about what happens to our students after they get into the workforce. So we prepare them, we give them the resume tips, we give them the interviewing skills, we do mock interviews and all of that. But once they enter the organizations, the professional businesses, what happens to them after? How are those businesses, how are those organizations taking care of our first generation students that we've just released into the real world? What are we doing as programs in higher education to make sure that these students are better supported in the real world? How can we collaborate with our network? How can we collaborate with our alumni from Rutgers that are employed by these big organizations, by these business professional businesses, to make sure that our students that are graduating from college with their bachelor's degree, with their master's degree, and going into work for the first time as a career, as something that they really want to do full time without going to college, and making sure that they're better supported as their identity, as first generation students, as underrepresented students from low income households. How can we collaborate with these organizations, with these business professionals, to make sure that these students, this specific population, is supported, and making it through without that many hardships, without with the challenges, but making sure that they have the resources, that they have the abilities to reach out and make sure that they can do better and be as successful. Thank you.
I kind of want to address the question that the young lady raised on this microphone over here about advocacy. And I think that anybody who works in opportunity programs, who is a student in an opportunity program, or who is a supporter of opportunity programs, need to know about 10 individuals in legislative life. You need to know who they are, okay? You need to know who is the head of your state senate. And you need to know who is the head of your state House of Representatives. And they often play different roles, and so you need to know both of them. You need to know who is the head of your state education board on the Senate. And the person who is the head of the state education in the House. In New York, it's the Assembly, but same thing. You need to know who's the head of the Finance Committee in your state Senate, and the head of the Finance Committee in your state House. You need to know who is the assistant to the governor, all of the people, because oftentimes your advocacy will not be read by the governor themselves, but someone who is in the governor's office will read that and make some kind of an advice or recognition. And then you need to know who your federal representatives are, both your federal senators, your state senators, and your state representatives, particularly those in your district. And what you need to do is you need to contact those individuals. You need to have your students contact those individuals. Every time you bring in a freshman class, you should have every one of your freshmen writing their state representative, I want to thank you for this opportunity. Every time you have a graduating class, you should have every one of your graduates writing those state representatives, I want to thank you for this opportunity to move out into society. And when you advocate and you go to the state capitol, those are the people you need to see first and foremost. So before you can do those things, you need to know who they are. And if you're in opportunity programs in any capacity, okay, you need to make it your business to learn them if you don't already know them. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Rutgers University for hosting this forum. I think it's an important discussion, but to also encourage those in attendance to encourage those who were not able to be here at the next one. This dialogue cannot just sit within the room and those within the room, okay? It needs to continue to spread, and so I encourage all of you, as will I, to invite more people to attend future conferences. And again, thank you for the opportunity to come and talk with you today.
I want to go back to what Tom Mortensen said at the beginning, that New Jersey, in terms of offering opportunity to low-income and first-generation students, is at the top. And New Jersey wouldn't be at the top if Rutgers wasn't at the top. And when you're number one, every time, you know, we don't get to be number one in much, you know. And most people in most institutions like to be number one. So I would just encourage you to make Rutgers claim it and to make that part of Rutgers' identity. It was great to see the Chancellor here today. In so many states, so many flagship institutions, so many land-grant institutions have so much to learn from you. But they can't learn unless you claim that identity and claim that success. And I'm not saying you're 80% to where you want to go or 50% where you want to go, but there's a lot of land grants, there's a lot of flagships that are still at milepost 2. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here.
So I would wholeheartedly agree with the sentiments today that advocacy and policy work is really critical in what we're doing. And so I'll offer a couple of thoughts related to how we can build those voices in the work on more of a practical level. And also with the caveat that we know that opportunity programs and the work that TRIO does is leaps and bounds beyond in some of these areas, but we're also still trying to serve a lot of other students who are not a part of those programs. And so one of the things that I think a lot about are these students that I like to call the students who are stuck in the middle, the students who are not being served because perhaps they are part of a low-income program or because they are a part of an academic provision program or even because they're a part of an academic scholarship or an honors college. Who are the students who are stuck in the middle? Maureen mentioned earlier that first generation is kind of a unifier, that there are students who have this identity but aren't getting support in other places. And how do we identify on our campus as who those students are and how do we find opportunities for them to build more voices around having those positive experiences, helping them find the right person that's going to help them make their way through their time. To circle back to a comment from a panelist earlier about post-completion support and how do we support alumni of institution, I would also ask that we think about how do we build these great experiences, and for students at Rutgers, how does Rutgers bring those first-generation students back to your campus? As alums? How do you use them, one, for fundraising? How do you use them for internships? How do you use them to speak at your events? Thinking about how you use your alumni, but then also moving back to an earlier point about how do we get them to vote? How do we get them to understand what the legacy they left at Rutgers is and how to utilize that as a voice within the policy world and through social media and those kinds of outlets? And then finally, something that I hear a lot about are institutions struggling with developing measurable outcomes for programs and across their institutions. I work with institutions who are 3 and 4 decades long in history of supporting first generation students and still say, I'm still not sure who my peer institutions are in this work. So helping to build connections and communities across institutions so they can share resources and understand, and in doing so, when that data starts moving and those conversations start happening, that allows us to continue building opportunities for conversations and for policy work, and to get more people involved with Celebration Day and those kinds of creating sort of a national community around first gen work. So, and thank you all again for the opportunity to be here. It's been a real fascinating morning.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking our distinguished panelists for.
And I'm sure there are more, but these are the folks, thank you. I just want to recognize all of the hard work that they do and the leadership, many of them are here, and Dr. Eddie Manning and Mr. Cora Holman for the team that they have. The work is hard, and it's definitely, we all do it collaboratively here at Rutgers. We're very proud of this RU-1st initiative and initiatives going on campus. At this time, I'm going to ask, there she is. I'm going to ask Mr. Kasia Wisely to deliver our closing remarks for the event, and then after Math Science. And so we're pleased with the work of our wonderful high school students that we do, and they were here yesterday on their day off preparing for college, and this is what we do every day, and it has a special place in my heart because it's been one of those programs that successfully get recently refunded, and speaks volumes, and many of the students that go through that program end up right here on our campus, and so we're proud of that success. And so Kasia, a participant, a first-generation student for all of our access and opportunity programs, is reflective of the hard work that gets done on our campus and that our great institution of Rutgers does, and give the shout out to Douglas as well, right, Douglas? So without further ado, our Director of Upward Bound and Upward Bound Math Science, Mr. Kasia Wisely. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues and esteemed panelists and guests. As mentioned, my name is Kasia Wisely. I'm the Director of Upper Bound and Pre-College Initiatives here at Rutgers, as well as the Central Jersey representative for the Association for Equality and Excellence in Education, which is the New York, New Jersey region for the COE, Council on Education. So as we convene our second RU-1st forum, I would like to again thank our panelists. So to our COE President, Maureen Horler, our Clinical Associate Professor, Henry Duran, the New Jersey EOF Director, Hashani Carter, our Senior Scholar of the Bell Institute, Tom Mortensen, and our scholars. So to our EOF and Student Support Services Senior, Soraya Hussein, and our Ronald E. McNair Scholar, John Vides. You guys did amazing. Thank you. They had the opportunity to provide us with some great insight and experiences as being a first-generation student and providing assistance for us. They talked about the hidden curriculum, which we never discussed, that serious transition that comes between high school and college that we all had the opportunity to experience. It doesn't matter how many summer bridge programs, how many pre-college programs they participate in, it's still a different experience that they're not always ready and prepared for. Here at Rutgers, as mentioned before from our Vice Chancellor, we do a lot of great things. We're trying to coordinate services that are available for first-gen, low-income, and underrepresented students while they're here. To mention a few, I just want to talk about the RU-1st Alliance. Literally, we've been able to establish from our informal relationships to combine formal ones, strengthen our connections with our career services, with our student affairs departments, with our learning centers, as well as our communities. So we all do great work here. What I want to mention that was kind of said throughout the panel, I'm not sure if you guys are very actively involved with our civic participation and engagement, but last week, the White House released the administration fiscal budget for 2019. And one thing that is depressing is that it was a $7.1 billion cut, which is a 10.5% decrease in educational spending. So regardless if we are a TRIO program or educational opportunity fund program, education as a whole is getting cut. And from the data that Mortensen showed us, it's very important for us to get involved and for us to get active. Because whether it's your department or our department, our students are losing their federal work study. They're losing their Pell Grants. So we must all come together to become more active and support those things. We must encourage all who support college access and success to be vocal in the opposition because it is a very real threat. In particular, specifically, this proposal does not include funding competitions, continuations for the Student Support Services Grant, which is heading into year 4 and will be at 50 years as well. In addition to the Ronald E. McNair program, where we have stellar students who are doing great work, who are going on to graduate programs, who are graduating.
Might not be at the speed that the world wants us to be at, but we are making strides for those different things. What we must do, I want to add, sorry. As the Upper Bound Director, for this new competition, they want to eliminate Upper Bound Math, Science, and Talent Search programs. For in particular, Upper Bound New Brunswick, we've been here for our 52 years. Many scholars have come out and done great work. We might not be all over the news and the TVs, but from experience as a first-generation college student, as a Rutgers Douglas College proud alum, we're making small strides. And I'm in that 3rd percentile up there. Just to make a nice little laugh. But what we need to make sure is that the voices of the low-income first-generation students, as well as the students with disabilities, are heard in our local communities here at Rutgers, whether it's Bush campus, Livingston campus, or Douglas. They need to be heard in Capitol Hill. They need to be heard in Trenton. And we need to support them. So today, I hope we are able to think about new collaborations we want to build, strengthen existing partnerships, but most importantly, please continue to strategize in your respective departments and institutions about innovative ways to support first-generation students. We must continue to maintain our safe spaces, as well as foster new experiences and opportunities for our students. Continue to support first-generation students on our college campuses, in our high schools, so that means as alumni of our cities, we must give back because we're tax-paying citizens. But we look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow at our James Dixon Carr Lecture Series featuring Bakari Sellers, as well as support our 50th anniversary for the Educational Opportunity Fund Program with more information. You can receive that information from colleagues in the audience. But most importantly, we want to give a special thank you to the leadership of Undergraduate Academic Affairs, as well as Student Access and Educational Equity for coordinating a wonderful event. Thank you, and this concludes our 2nd annual RU-1st Forum. We look forward to seeing you all next year. I am so sorry, Sara Whitley. I'm going to say sorry for 2 reasons. Dr. Whitney might tell you I begged for us to have our RU-1st initiatives on all 5 campuses this year, so thank you, Sara, very much for working with our first Success Center. Sorry about that. But this concludes our RU-1st Forum.
Thank you so much.